Those online, can you hear us?
Somebody say yes.
Yes, I can.
Yes, ma'am.
You're ready. I'll start the recording.
Ready.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome. This is George Dunklin. I'm chair of the Pest Committee, and I'm calling this meeting to order here at 11:01 on March 10th. Let's get started first. Let's do a roll call. Let's start here in the room first. Otis, why don't you start with you?
I'm Otis Howe. I represent the Arkansas Crop Protection Association.
Jason Davis, University of Arkansas, Division of Agriculture.
Lee Gibson, Department of Agriculture. Tracy Eads, Department of Agriculture.
Courtney Sakes, University of Arkansas, Division of Agriculture.
Okay.
Randy Reynolds, Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Randy.
Annalie Browder, Department of Agriculture.
Susie Nichols, Department of Agriculture.
And let's see on the line, we have Sam Stuckey, you're online, I see.
Yes, Sam Stuckey, Arkansas State Plant Board member, Clarkdale, Arkansas, represented Cotton, just listening into the meeting, George.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Caleb, are you online? Caleb Wall?
Yes, Caleb Wall, representing rice growers, Craighead County.
Thank you, Caleb. Robert Thorne?
Robert Thorne, Marion, Arkansas, representing nursery and plants.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Travis?
Yeah, Travis Center, Mississippi County, representing farmers, just listening in.
Okay, thank you, Travis. See my old friend Nathan Slayton up there.
Morning, George. Nathan Slayton, representing University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture.
Hey, Matthew Miles, are you on now?
Yes, Matt Miles, DeShay County Plant Board member representing soybean farmers.
Okay, Matt, I appreciate you joining. And hopefully Sammy Angel has got an excused absence. Garrett Frost has got one, and Reynolds. I don't think Reynolds joined us today. Okay, all right, thanks, Brandon. All right, thank you very much for attending, and we've got a fairly short agenda, but one that's going to be, I think, very interesting, as we're going to cover some different subjects. So first, it's going to be, I'm going to turn it over to Susie. We're going to talk about the drone category.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. About a month ago, board member Garrett Frost asked staff to look into possibly adding a drone category. Currently, we have an aerial category, but nothing in the testing or training covers drones or unmanned vehicles. So Garrett reached out to me and asked me to look into this. So I've talked to Jason Davis with University of Arkansas and Pest Bradley. And what I'd like to ask the committee today is what we would like to do is basically, I'd like the committee to give me permission to pursue this. What we'd like to do is add a drone category under aerial. We would have an aerial manned category and an aerial unmanned category, with the understanding that the University of Arkansas would be updating testing and training to meet the specific needs, because the current aerial test references fixed wing. And with this ever-changing world of drones, we thought it was about time for us to start looking into this. The U of A felt like they could get this testing and training ready for the 2026 season. Again, this would have to go through rulemaking. We'd have to add a category. The board would have to approve it, public comment. I do not think this is going to be controversial, but you never know until we get into it. And what I'd like, and Jason Davis is here if y'all have any questions or want him to chime in any shape, form, or fashion. And Ples is online and Courtney's here.
Okay, good. Jason, you want to talk about kind of how you see this? Why don't you come on up close?
Yeah, sure. One thing to consider here is that most, as these pilots, manned and unmanned, go through this process, it is very much geared towards fixed wing aircraft. The safety, drift mitigation, all the components are fixed wing. And so really the pilots going through from an unmanned standpoint are walking through it from somewhat just a nominally getting their certificate. This would ideally put them more in line with learning what they need to learn to have proper field applications and mitigate the drift and follow the labels like they need to, which they have to for the FAA anyway, but this would better align us as a state with those categories similar to the FAA and the federal level.
Is India or any other states that have done this, gone down this road?
I'm not, I'm there, Susie may have spoken with some other states. We're very much in a growing stage of this industry. And so I'm not exactly sure where every other state is at, but.
And that's something I'm going to reach out to the states in Region 6 and some of our surrounding states. I'm going to see if they've done anything, but everybody keeps calling Arkansas. We've got Jason Davis here is a hot commodity. He seems to know a lot about drones, and everybody is calling to see what we're doing.
Sure.
Now, I can't say no other state has implemented anything,
Okay.
but I still think we're going to be on the front end of this because the calls I'm getting from people taking this test is, hey, this doesn't say anything about drones.
Yeah.
And I get it. And if this does go through and we pass this rule later on, it's with the understanding these tests can constantly be updated as technology changes. But like I said, I would like to, like I said, the draft of this is easy in my opinion, but before the next board meeting, I'd like to do a little research to see what other states are doing. But this is the first step.
Which kind of layout, as you see it today, the steps that you're.
I'd like for this committee to give me approval to put together a draft and some information to bring back to the board and or committee to start moving forward for rulemaking for a drone category.
Okay.
With the hopes of this being in place for 2026. And I say that because U of A is, they're swamped. They have to develop tests and training.
Okay. Matt, I think you and I are only two committee members here to actually have a vote. Russ Slayton, you're on here as well, Nathan. Either one of you have any issues or with what Susie's asking for?
No, I would actually make a motion to that fact.
Okay. Thank you. Nathan, I guess Nathan, you can make your own committee. You want to make them second that for me?
Second.
Thank you, Nathan. All right, here no discussion. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay, motion passes. Okay, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Jason.
No problem.
And Jason, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing what all that y'all come up with. I mean, this is certainly a growing field. It's just can be very productive, but also we can certainly create problems if we don't do something about it.
Happening quickly.
And happening quickly. And I guess one thing you and I talked about, Susie, was you create some outreach or some education flyers and what farmers have to have. I think it's really important public farmers know what they're required to have right now.
We've actually got an updated version of that document that I shared with the board in the past. Jason Davis has chimed in with some comments, and so has our attorney, Sherry. I've got to add those changes because we've added the section like commonly asked questions and answers.
Yeah.
So when I first created this document last year, we still didn't know a lot. It was basically kind of in-house to help staff, but we've expanded on it. So I'm hoping I can get that updated and back up on our website within the next week and a half.
Just roughly, just a ballpark guess, how many licenses that are out there that have actually passed the test?
I don't know, but I can tell you next week at the board meeting, because I can run a query. In the past, when we issue licenses, this is just kind of FYI, we tracked equipment, but it was just air or ground.
Mm-hmm.
Then the drones came along and everybody, including board members, says how many drones we've got licensed. I didn't know because it was just air or ground.
Yeah.
This year, we track it air fixed, rotary, drone, and ground. We've expanded the categories so we can search that better and give the board more information. So I can't have you that number next week.
And when you get this updated,
I'll send it to the board members too.
send it to all the board members. Yes. And then, also how do you get, do you go through, I guess, through extension? How do you get the information out to farmers?
What I'm going to do is get with our marketing team as soon as we get just some of the little back and forth tweaks updated, and we'll see if we can get on our website, see if they can push it to social media. I'll send it to the U of A again. Again, last year I put this document together quickly. I didn't really expect it to take off like it has nationwide. So now I'm trying to fine tune it.
Well,
We've leveraged that information in countless county production meetings and pesticide meetings in the last year. It's been pushed out significantly from that document.
Well, being at the Gin Show last weekend, there's more presence of drones I've ever seen before.
Yes.
And this is going to continue to grow and just try to prevent good people for getting in trouble. Make sure they go through the proper license.
We're getting questions about drones every day.
Good.
That's a good chunk of our calls.
Good. Okay, thank y'all both. All right, next, Susie, looks like we got a discussion of registration, which I was not involved last time. So you want to give a little bit of history of this and kind of what's going on?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2018, we had a product that was submitted for registration called Kaput. It was to deal with feral hogs, and before the registration went through, Arkansas Game and Fish, and I think some others came to our board with some concerns about how this product was going to be used and bears getting into it, and then if other animals ate the dead hogs. Off of that, the registration was pulled, for lack of a better term, by the manufacturer. And Arkansas developed a feral hog eradication task force. And over the years they've met, they looked into research, and the product has not been registered here in Arkansas. The manufacturer has submitted for registration again here for 2025. So we said we would bring the board back up to date before we did anything. And we have a few people on here. We have someone from the manufacturer of Kaput. And I'm going to apologize, Richard. I am not sure how to pronounce your last name, so I'm not going to attempt it, if you don't mind.
I guess it was Poosh.
That's what I was getting.
Poche, it's French.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Like I said, I knew I would butcher it, but Richard's got a presentation he would like to go through today. I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you hear us?
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to share. If I can get this thing loaded here.
Thank you for the name. I knew I probably would not get that correct.
Richard,
Yeah, I grew up in South Louisiana, so 100% coon, whatever. I'll leave out the second word, but yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share updates on where we are, and it's good that John's going to follow because he can give you more of the details of their testing. And as a background, I grew up in South Louisiana, like I said, and Symetrics was established in 1999. It's a small family-owned business, and we manufacture pest control products. We have some 18 registrations with the EPA, and we're pursuing some products for Lyme disease control in mice and also white-tailed deer. As background, I went to Southwestern Louisiana, Texas A&M, UC Berkeley, and Wildlife and Natural Resource Management. And personal experience, I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, had the good fortune of working in a national park for 4 years. And then from there, I went to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of, back then it was the Denver Wildlife Research Center. Now it's NWRC, based in Fort Collins. And we spent 2 years in Bangladesh, worked in India, Pakistan, Egypt, all rodent and bird control related work. And then I had fortunate opportunity to work for a pesticide company for 5 years, where I learned a lot about product development and bringing products to the market with EPA and FDA approvals. What I'd like to do is give a brief overview of the hog situation nationwide and the timeline in the development of the product. It didn't happen overnight, began in the year 2000, and why we selected warfarin, and the issues or concerns about primary and secondary toxicity of animals exposed to warfarin, and some of the results on our pen and field studies with the formulation that we currently market today, and includes the responsibilities of whoever's using the product and the use restrictions. And then I'll briefly cover the part of the training that we use when we're educating farmers and users on how to use the product effectively. And as I mentioned, their journey started in the year 2000, where we actually had a grant from the Hawaii Community Foundation and began working on a feral hog toxicant because of hogs in that were issues in Hawaii. But the main reason they wanted us to look at difacinone, which is a little more toxic anticoagulant, and the potential for hogs eating that bait. Then and then we pursued a grant opportunity with USDA, and we worked at Texas A&M's facility in Kingsville and started screening formulas and concentrations of their different toxicants. And then when we zeroed in 2009, we met with the Department of Ag, and they had suggested we apply for a special local needs permit because the problem was so bad back then. And then after discussions with the EPA in 2018 through 16, we had repeated meetings with them as we developed the product, and we went to Washington or did remote Zoom calls for updates. And in 2013, then we applied for that experimental use permit, and then also an EUP for Texas to do the field testing. And we were fortunate in 2015 and 16 to obtain grants from the Department of Ag in Texas. Then we obtained EPA approval of federal label in 2017 and also approval by the state of Texas to market the product. However, in 2018, the Texas legislature pulled the registration and provided funds for Texas A&M and the USDA to do some field testing to confirm our results. And that was notably the first time in the history of Texas that a registration had been pulled by the legislature from the Department of Ag. And as we all know, feral hogs inflict a tremendous amount of damage throughout the U.S. and becoming more prevalent throughout North America. There are issues with erosion along riverbanks and water quality. Groundwater contamination is increasing, as we all know, with E. coli and feral hog fecal matter. And there's a tremendous, as the picture showed, tremendous amount of destruction and landscape modification. And as we all know, they spread a number of diseases, or they may, to humans and domestic animals, and compete significantly with wildlife for available resources. Studies done in Florida estimate that about 2 billion non-hog animals are killed annually by feral hogs. Those include reptiles, amphibians, rodents, ground nesting birds, and domestic animals like sheep, goat, cattle, and then deer. And as we're all aware, hogs can transmit a number of diseases and bring a lot into the domestic livestock industry that are detriments in the end. And here's a small list of all of them. And what we did back beginning in 2006, we again, it was funding from through the SBIR program through USDA. We constructed pens in North Texas, collected hogs, penned them individually, started screening food products that might be conducive to developing a good formulation, tested them on the hogs, and then began to experiment after 6 months with different anticoagulant rodenticides. We tried difacinone, but actually it wasn't as effective as warfarin. And with the warfarin, we did a range finding study looking at the conventional 250 part per million warfarin that's in rat and mouse baits, and begin looking at lower levels. And the whole reason was to try to develop a product that was still efficacious against hogs, but yet not pose a major problem to non-target animals. And from there, once we chose the 50 part per million bait, then we did a number of field studies The ear tag transmitter for the hog on the right was we trapped a number of hogs and put these transmitters on them, put the bait out, and monitored mortality. And these transmitters had a different signal, so when the hog wasn't moving, it emitted a different frequency. So we knew either the hog expired or the transmitter had gone bad. In the lower left, we use the larger GPS collars that where we could monitor movements of the hog by satellite. And this slide shows all of the little dots in the picture with on the right. If you look to the left, the white dots, that's an individual hog, and the different colors for different individuals, so we could actually track the movements. And interestingly enough, as one would expect, when we began the baiting process, the home range actually of the hogs actually were reduced, and we've published several of those papers in that. And the lower left is pictures of two hogs that are sedated, where we attach the hog collars because they have really stubby necks, so we have to develop a harness to keep it from sliding off of the pig's body. And then why warfarin bait? As I mentioned, some of the range finding studies we did, we settled on warfarin. And going through the literature, some 50 years ago, researchers discovered that hogs were really sensitive to warfarin. And warfarin, as we know, is a human drug. Some 30 million Americans take warfarin every day. And one of the advantages of it, it has an antidote, vitamin K1, so it can be reversed in humans or animals. And then, as mentioned earlier, it's very effective at a really low concentration. And as an example, the half-life in plasma is only 42 hours, so it's quickly metabolized and excreted from the body. That's why when humans take Coumadin, which is a liquid form of warfarin, they have to take the tablet every day because the warfarin's being removed from the body and excreted. And an old concept that was developed in the 1500s, actually, dose makes the poison, by a guy that's considered the father of pharmaceuticals. Um, this resonated in our purpose for looking for the ideal concentration. We didn't want to go too high, obviously. Research was actually done on hogs in Australia some 20, 25 years ago, and it was found that warfarin was really effective in eliminating the hogs. The only problem is they were using a concentration that was 18 times more than needed. And so that there was really no concern about non-targets in Australia at the time, but it was more an issue of how it affected the pigs. Now, in the US, the warfarin rat and mouse baits contain 0.025% warfarin. That's 250 parts per million. And as I alluded to earlier, we lowered the concentration to 1/5 that amount, or 80% less, to 0.005. And if you look at the literature, everything is considered toxic, anything, drinking water. If you drink too much water and nonstop, you can develop edema of the brain or water on the brain, and it can be fatal. And we know of all the college students that were lost because of drinking alcohol, binge drinking. So anything you can do. We watched the special on OxyContin last night, and some 80,000 Americans died from it because if at a safe level, it could be beneficial, but with too much, it can kill a person. And so the goal was always to find a product that had a reduced risk level and still while ensuring efficacy to the hog, but yet minimizing effects on wildlife and non-target animals. So we're all familiar with those who use pesticides at home or on the farm with the toxicity categories. When EPA looks at the database for a particular product, they put a signal word on it to the left where it's danger, poison. It's considered really highly toxic, and that's called a category 1. A lot of the rodenticides found in stores and farm stores and grocery stores may have a warning signal, but those still are considered moderately toxic. And then the low toxicity is one that you see more like the tomcats and the decons, and those are category 3s. And warfarin is actually a category 4, which is the lowest toxicity level EPA regulates. And to give you an idea, if you look at the lower left, you look at the LD50, which is the lethal dose that would kill an animal per kilogram. It's in milligrams per kilogram. Caffeine, as an example, is 192. Nicotine, 50 milligrams per kilogram. And vitamin D3, which is also available in retail markets for rodent control, 37, while the feral hog bait is more than 60,000 milligrams per kilogram. So one of the areas we really looked at and focused on was the effect on primary toxicity to non-target animals in the event like someone spilled the bait on the ground, or a raccoon somehow got into a feeder. And then also secondary toxicity. What if an animal ate the dead carcass on the landscape, either a predator or a scavenger? If a coyote ate a dead hog, how would it affect it? And here are data that was generated over the years with the higher concentration of warfarin, 0.025% or 250 parts per million. When mallard ducks were exposed to 5 times what the concentration is in the hog bait, there were no effects for 14 days. And it was similar with bobwhite quail, no effects for 14 days. And that's eating the bait only. And bobwhite quail has a really high LD50, and it's greater than 10,000 milligrams per kilogram. And EPA said 30 years ago that warfarin is virtually non-toxic to birds, which was part of the reason we really looked at the compound from the beginning. And we've actively been doing research for warfarin over 30 years. And then we did a number of studies as a secondary toxicity in the lab, where we exposed rats to concentrations 10 times that of the feral hog bait and fed those dead rats to magpies with no effects. We did something similar with prairie dogs and fed those prairie dogs that had expired from eating the bait to European ferrets, or with no effects. And then we actually were doing some work in Louisiana where alligators were of concern. And we actually had alligators in our lab in Colorado, and which was interesting, and exposed the rats to warfarin at 5 times the concentration of the hog bait with no effects. The only trick was feeding the gators, but we eventually learned that after losing a few fingers. The warfarin, 10 times the concentration fed to mallards, no effects, and similar to bobwhite quail with no effects. Now, one of the things about the bait, it contains a fat-soluble dye. So if the hog happens to eat the bait and expires, then and a hunter shoots the hog, um, the fat soluble dye appears within about 3 hours. And so he'll know right away that the hog ate the bait. And the concentrations are also fairly low, that it wouldn't be any more than the human ingestion of the coumadin, or the liquid type warfarin for human drug. And then I'll just go quickly through this part of the training that when we train the farmers and ranchers on how to use the bait effectively and adhere to the EPA label. First thing is you look for signs where the hogs are. Obviously, you don't want to set up your control area unless you see any kind of damage. You actually see the hogs, like the corn in the upper center there, or damage to the landscape on the right, tracks, droppings, fecal matter. And so set up your operation where you know the hogs are. And then if you follow the label, it's recommended that you remove livestock during the baiting program around the feeders so that larger animals won't get to it. And we have done about 5 years of research in the early stages, looking at a fairly sizable feeder. This one on the left, we call the hog stopper. It weighs about 130 pounds, and it has to be secured with T-posts. I'll show you a little in the next few slides. And if those aren't available to a farmer, then he can use a modified pig feeder, a hog feeder that you can find at farm stores, as long as you have 17 pounds of weights on the door. And the reason we came up with that weight was we did a series of studies where we had different weights on the doors to see. We were working primarily with raccoons at the time, if they could open the doors. Now, the feeder, then when it's put out, has to be secured with T-post. And you would want to put them close to where you know hogs would hang out, and it would be next to brush, closer to where they might be feeding and where they would traditionally bed down for the night. And here, if the feeders are well managed and you're monitoring your hogs, the lower left, and well, both of these were really done in Northwest Texas, near Turkey. We were experimenting with the hog stopper on the lower left and how effective it was in pigs being conditioned and trained to use it and how to open it, and then ensuring that was a protection for any wildlife or domestic animals in the area. So the next thing then was what you want to do is you want to condition the hogs to the feeders. And this is one of the most important stages in a successful baiting program. The label reads you should condition the hogs for 1 to 3 feeders. They will learn to open the door to the feeder at 1 week, but to be certain that all of the hogs are being trained, it's recommended that you go much longer. And you can condition with putting crack or whole corn into the feeder with the door propped open, and I'll show you how that's done. Or you can have cracked or whole corn soaked in water for 3 to 5 days so it has a noticeable odor. And there are commercial hog track that you can pour in the corn, or you can use kaput feral hog lure. And if you don't use the lure, you won't have as much success as just using the corn. So we highly recommend that the lure is part of the baiting process. So this figure shows that when you pour 25 to 50 pounds of corn or lure into each feeder, you lower the door to 4 to 6 inches so that the hogs will find the feed, they'll smell it, and over time, when they see the free corn, they open the bar, they push the bar up with their snout, and they can reach in farther and get more of the feed. And the advantage of that is you're conditioning the hogs to use that bar and work that bar that goes horizontally, and they can do it fairly easily once they're conditioned to do it. And if if the corns it isn't being eaten, then you really relocate your feeder to an area where you know there are hogs. And then the next part is the baiting. Then what the farmers recommend to do, the label says, you pull the pin, drop the door, and you put the bait in. This is the picture of that bait with the blue dye. It's extruded product. It has paraffin in it, so it's somewhat weather resistant. And but when it's on the inside of the feeder, it's not a big issue. And then you load the feeder with 25 to 50 pounds of the bait, and and then you drop the door, and you're ready to remove hogs. Now, closing the lid, of course, is important, and it's all clear on the label. And if you go to our website, which is at the end of the presentation, you'll have all of this information, plus a video that shows some of what I'm presenting here today. And so then once the feeder is positioned, you make sure, again, it's secure, and you monitor every 3 to 4 days, and making sure you have feed in there consistently, or bait in there consistently. And the other thing is, we recommend that you check each feeder around midday to minimize disturbance to the hogs. And here's a series again in North Texas where there were a tremendous amount of hogs. We had some camera images of up to 70 hogs around feeders. And if, again, patience is the key. And I'll show you what happens when you have a lot of hogs and they learn to, and if you look at the doors going up and down, it's like an accordion. And so they adjust to it quite easily and enjoy the free food. And then this was back in 2016. We were doing a study in the same general region of Texas, and this 300-pound boar kept coming up to these feeders. And these are the commercial feeders with the weighted doors. And it shows the value of being patient and really conditioning the hogs to these feeders. And what happened, this picture was taken at 4 a.m. in the morning, and a tremendously serious storm hit with a lot of lightning, and I think it was 6 to 8 inches of rain. And by that nighttime, the hog was so conditioned to the feeders, he kept coming to the feeders and feeding even though it was flooded with water. So once the treatment is underway, return to the feeders, within 4 days of the initial bait placement, and inspect for dead or dying hogs in the area. Monitor the amount of feed in the feeders, and then continue monitoring for about 2 weeks after the bait is removed. All hogs must be disposed of properly, either buried on site, maybe buried on site. And the main reason is not because of the toxicity of the hogs or any non-target animals. It's more for disease transmission to humans, domestic animals, or other wildlife. And each state has slightly different disposal methods. So wherever you're using your product, the user should check with the state and local authorities. Right now, we currently the product is available in Texas and in Oklahoma. In Texas, it's a slightly different category. It's called a special limited use product. And what that requires is the purchaser of the product, well, the farmer or rancher cannot buy the product unless they do the training. And after the training, they take a test, and if it's 80% or better, they're given a certificate. And this can all be done online. And the farmer can then take a certificate and go to one of our distributors that is set up and has a license for the state, where it is. And in Oklahoma, it is approved as a restricted use product, or an RUP. And retraining, again, the applicator has to be licensed and purchase the product from an authorized dealer or a distributor. And with that, I know it's a short 20 minutes, or I'd be happy to answer any questions, or does that come at the end?
If anybody has any questions, I mean, y'all can state the questions now. We can also follow up at the end of the kaput speakers.
So let's continue on.
Okay. Okay, the next individual we have up, if they would like to speak or make a short presentation, is Dr. John Tomachek. Did I say your name correctly?
Good job. Good job. I'm proud of you. I'm another one of those people that has an odd to say last name. So like Richard's a Cajun from South Louisiana. I'm a Czech farm boy from Central Texas. So appreciate y'all having me on. So everybody, my name's John. You can just call me John. That's fine. My work with this product was done over the course of a couple of years. We were tasked by the Texas legislature with evaluating this product, as Richard referred to. And so I've got a short presentation. I promise I'll keep it brief and allow you time to ask me questions. So let me go ahead and get that screen share up. Give me just a moment. Okay, would y'all let me know if you are seeing the presentation view, or do I need to switch it around?
We're seeing the notes on the
We're
side.
seeing the notes.
Okay, very good. How about that?
There you go.
Perfect. Good deal. All right. So again, my name is John Tomachek. I'm with Texas A&M University, and it says Texas A&M AgriLife. As y'all are familiar, in the great state of Arkansas, we've got research, experiment stations, and extension as part of the land grant university. So I've been all three different things. I've been teaching, research, extension, because I'm a land grant kind of guy. So we were tasked back by our legislature a handful of years ago now with taking a look at this product. And as Richard referred, it was somewhat of a little bit of a political fight back in the late 2010s, where there were groups that wanted to see it, groups that didn't. And I want to emphasize something Richard said. Typically, when a new pesticide comes up for registration in Texas, TDA obviously does its work. But often when a pesticide comes up to Texas Department of Ag, with registration also comes independent research that Texas A&M has done completely independently of the company, but often supported by the company to have independent data from which to make those choices. And that was something that was discussed with this, is could you do basically what y'all always do, but we'll provide some funding for that. So it was done between my team at Texas A&M and Texas Wildlife Services, which is a joint USDA state of Texas program. And obviously Mike Bodenchuk is not on here today with me, but I want to emphasize it was a teamwork effort. And so let me just go over kind of how this came to be, because it was a specific task that our legislature gave us. So our 87th legislature, which was a handful of years ago now, wanted us to look at specifically if this product would be effective statewide. And as you're familiar, the environment in Texas is very diverse, from southeastern pine forest in the east to subtropical scrub country in the south, high plains, mountains, you name it. They wanted to know if it would work everywhere. And they also wanted to know if it would make any kind of difference for landowners. Basically, if they were going to take this one up and register it, can it actually work everywhere? And will it make a difference for landowners? So we were tasked with getting this out on land, but the ledge was pretty darn specific with us. They're used to research types saying, great, I'm going to do this in a controlled setting. I'm going to run it X way with my people. We're going to do it to the letter. And they said, hold on just a minute. We want you to do this on private land, and we want you to use private pesticide applicators to do it. Now, you choose your folks so you can get the job done, but we want to see if a private person doing it can actually make it work. So we worked with a handful of private applicators throughout the state. We gave them best practices to follow. We monitored, we gave advice, but we let them do the applications, and we let them show us what could or could not work. They did not want it on government land, and they did not want government people doing it. We provided the product to folks at no cost. And again, I'm going to gloss over a lot of things. If you want to read the full report, I forget how many pages it is, 90 pages or something. I think Richard's got it up on his website, but if not, I'm more than happy to email it to you. It is a public document. So we had a lot of goals in this study. I've already mentioned making sure the product worked across all the regions of Texas, and that's a very common concern for us, as I'm sure y'all concern yourself in Arkansas with, is this going to work everywhere? There's a lot of diversity in any state, and ag land is not ag land. It all differs. And then, is it going to help folks actually make a difference with pig management? The third one was they wanted to see if this product actually killed pigs. We've heard what the manufacturer says, but we're always skeptical. So does it actually kill pigs? And they wanted us to see, are there non-target impacts that you can see? Is it causing problems out there to non-target species, and how can you mitigate that? And then, of course, we had to hand our results up to the Ledge and to the Department of Ag so they could do their work in registration. And this is kind of like doing a prequel movie. You already know at the end of the story that they did, in fact, register the product. So this is the data that led up to that decision kind of at the end. So basically what we did working with producers is we said, okay, we're going to go put this thing out, and Richard's talked to you about their practices from the company on how to do it, and we wanted to follow that to the letter as well as the EPA label. But we also needed to know if this thing can work. We are going to give it every chance to work, but we also need to know if it's killing pigs. So when we designed this thing, we transitioned pigs onto eating this stuff. Now, if you've ever worked with baiting wildlife, and boy, baiting wildlife in Texas is a whole industry, right? If I'm going to put wild animals on protein pellets, for example, that have never eaten them before, everything knows what corn tastes like. So I start them on corn and then I transition them. Same thing with this. We started them on corn because every pig in Texas knows what corn tastes like. And then we started to move them over to I call it placebo here, but it is the lure product that Richard mentioned. And we worked them through the changes of those doors as well. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. So we would do this for a period of time until we knew that the pigs had learned how to use that lure bait. And then we'd move to the toxic baiting, which I call hot baiting. Forgive me, I'm an old trapper. It's hot baiting. So baiting for at least 3 weeks is what we said we would do because that's what the label said. Now, if the applicator wanted to keep going, they could, but we said you've got to do it for at least 3 weeks to give it a shake. And then what we would do after the applicator said, I'm done with hot baiting, I think I've killed all the pigs, we would put corn back in that feeder to see, are there pigs around that just did not want to eat this lure or this toxic bait, but they're still here? We also had a site fairly close by, as you can see on that right-hand photo, which I call a pig roller. It's a piece of PVC pipe, like septic line pipe, that we fill with corn, drill holes in it. We've got a chain and a ring over a T-post. And the idea is if the pigs just don't trust the toxic feeder, they will still roll this corn tube around and they'll dump corn on the ground and we'll see them. So it's checks and balances on making sure that the pigs are in fact there using the product and they did die, as opposed to they just don't like this stuff. So every site had this pair, if you will. And I didn't include all my photos in here, but some of my favorite photos from this study are watching a little squadron of piglets follow behind mama in a V shape as she pushes that tube around. And they're picking up all the corn falling out of it, and they'll do this for hours at a time. This is a flow chart, and I want to emphasize you do not need to read this thing if you don't want to, but what we did with our applicators is we said, okay, you're going to find a place where you've got pig damage and you can get in there and you can do this process, and this is how you're going to work through the bait. The important thing here is to note that with these stages I showed you in the last slide of getting them adjusted to using the lure, we did not move on to the next phase until we were confident that the pigs were comfortable with eating that stuff and eating it out of the feeder. So we move through this flow chart. We're sure that every pig out there is using this stuff. They're comfortable with it. And then we switch over to toxic bait. Richard mentioned that if you want this to work, you have got to have those pigs well trained. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Pigs are smart. Pigs can be easily trained, but they can also be easily dissuaded from using a product. I'm going to talk about that in our conclusions later on. So we had to monitor these sites. And when we talk about the layout of these sites, just so you have an idea, we had these feeders. And so the hog stopper feeder that Richard mentioned, we'd have that in the middle. It's got 2 doors. We had cameras watching each door, and we had fences there just so that we, for the sake of photos, could keep track of what pig was on what side of this feeder. I forget anymore how many photos this came out to. It was something in the ballpark of 700,000 photos. And I have several employees of mine that if they ever see another picture of a feral hog from a game camera, they'll probably quit and go do something else for a living. Boy, it was a lot, guys. But we had to monitor all the time throughout all the years that we did this to have an idea of how many pigs we had there, how much bait was used, and what the reduction in terms of percentage reduced of the pigs coming to the feeder were. So that's what that might look like in practice. You know, Richard mentioned that you need to exclude livestock, and that's absolutely true. And we achieved that in several different ways. At some sites, it was just simple barbed wire up around this feeder site just to keep the cattle out of it. But in a lot of cases, we didn't have livestock in those areas as well. So again, it might look like this, simple, everything done to the letter, other than the fact that we also included game cameras to watch this. And Richard mentioned the commercial feeders as well. We use those too, but because they have a single door, we just needed a single camera watching them. And then the pig rollers I mentioned, again, just to show so you understand what it looks like. All the distances are the same, so we had a nice wide frame of view for those cameras. And this is what that pig roller might look like in practice. You know, again, it's nothing fancy. It's a roller tube. We dump corn on the ground and get pigs used to that site. And just as a fun fact, if anybody's out there and you're trying to bait hogs and get them trained to a spot, I actually like the roller tubes a lot. They're pretty handy on training pigs. And if you say, I need something bigger than that, you can achieve the same idea with a 55-gallon drum full of corn or anything else that you've got size-wise. Okay, so just to cut to the chase a little bit for us, you know, Richard showed you photos of the bait already. The takeaway, I'm going to tell you the big message, and then I'm going to go into the details. It did work for us. So we use this thing across the state of Texas in every ecological region, and you know that has to do with plants and climate and animals and whatnot. We used it everywhere. And north to south, east to west, every season of the year, we killed pigs with it. And we killed pigs pretty darn effectively following the process that I talked about. As Richard's already talked about, and I'm not going to go into the weeds on it, it is low toxicity, so it's low risk for non-targets, and it does metabolize extremely quickly in the body as far as chemicals go. And Richard also mentioned that there's products out there available for rats and mice. They're a lot higher concentration than this stuff is. I do want to emphasize we did not use it around black bears, and that is one of the things that I refuse to do is use it around bears just because bears have the ability to open that feeder device, and I was not confident that we could keep bears out of it. So we did not use it around bears. I used it in bear country, but it was a simple point to the producer of, if you see bears around, discontinue. Stop right now. And in my opinion, one of the advantages of a low toxicity product is you can cut off the supply of the toxicant if you needed to, if you had an oops or you had a problem. We know that for pigs, 5 to 6 pounds is what you need for toxic levels. But I will also emphasize that pigs do not equally share resources. And so in ours, we did one feeder at a time because we wanted to see in a minimal scenario, could you get this product to work? Richard showed you photos with 3 feeders side by side, and I do think there's a lot of value in that because bigger pigs will dominate the feeders and not allow the smaller pigs in. One of the problems is pigs also eat like pigs, and so you've got to keep an eye on bait levels in that feeder. You may have a sounder of pigs go through 300 pounds of bait in a night. We had that happen in a few cases. And boy, do they die really, really well when they go through 300 pounds of bait in a night. But you have to keep up with it to make sure that it is not being depleted, because we've had situations in this, and I'll get into the faults and foibles we had with applicators, which are instructive, where very reasonable. I grew up in that world. You get busy, something happens, you've got a storm, you've got an emergency, and you can't get back out to the bait site for a week. And it's gone empty for a week. And by that time, the pigs have lost interest in it and they've moved on. So keeping.
Hey, John,
Yes, ma'am.
sorry, I hate to interrupt you. For
No,
anybody
not at
on,
all.
y'all can hear a loud noise. There's construction going on downstairs. There's drilling and hammering coming through to this room. We are asking them to stop for 30 minutes, but if it's disrupting anybody online, y'all let me know. And again, John, I'm very sorry to interrupt you.
Oh.
I just trying to let everybody know what that was, because everybody's looking around the room trying to figure out what the noise is.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. And no apologies needed with me, y'all. I'm easy. And if I'm not clear on something, feel free to interrupt me.
And we've asked them to stop, so hopefully in a second they'll stop for about 30 minutes on this.
I understand. I understand. So with this, getting pigs to eat that amount of bait over time so that they do in fact die from the product, what we saw, and I did not include photos of this, but what we saw is pigs eating the bait regularly, very, very normal in appearance, no obvious signs of distress, and then you start seeing smaller and smaller numbers of pigs. And most of the time for us, the smaller pigs disappeared first, the bigger pigs disappeared later. Not universally, but it tend to be the trend. What we saw is that those last times right before they died, and I had a few die in front of the camera, they come to the feeder, they eat of the feeder, they sleep next to the feeder, and this was pretty common, y'all. They were so comfortable with the bait sites when producers went to go fill the feeders, the pigs would get up and walk away 10 or 20 yards, and they'd fill the feeders up. And as the producer, the applicator's driving away, the pigs come back and they start eating. So they're very, very comfortable. And that's so important. If they're sleeping next to the feeder, you've done your job. So these pigs, as they are in their last days of life, they're sleeping in front of the feeder. They're getting up and they're eating from the feeder and they're going back down. They're very somnolent. They're very lethargic. And then they just don't get up again. But we did not see a reduced willingness to eat from that feeder. And we did not see really changes in behavior until right at the end when we were able to note that. I will point out one thing that I have said, and I've jokingly said it to Richard many times, is I don't know what's in this stuff, but boy, the pigs like it. And I've joked with Richard, are there illicit substances in that lure? This is a product that I have rarely seen pigs so excited to eat. It is something that throughout the seasons of the year they were very interested in. And anybody that's trapped pigs knows that it can vary seasonally how much they're interested in your baits at your traps. This is one we did not see any problems with that, with two notable exceptions. When we were in areas that produced peanuts, at that absolute best time to go and destroy peanuts, pigs were a little bit less interested in this, but they still used it. And we had an event in parts of our state that are basically oak forests where there was a thick crop of acorns on the ground, and pigs were less interested in this. A fun fact, if you do not know, Eurasian wild boar, from which we domesticated hogs, their chief diet item in the wild is acorns. That is what they are evolved to eat. And so it's hard to compete with acorns. But aside from that, they love this stuff. So what we started to do is 6 to 8 days after deployment, we started to see carcasses out on the landscape. So we had daily checks, walking and wandering, looking for pig carcasses and noting where they were, what they looked like, etc. And I would say that that crescendoed probably about day 7, day 8, and then 9, 10, it starts to taper off. And we had most of the pigs dead in a sounder within 10 days, maybe a little bit after, as long as they're coming reliably to that feeder. Now, this blue dye is something that was of great interest for the state of Texas, and a lot of folks were asking questions about, and I'll save you the history of the blue dye. It's an old product, it's been around a long time, that Richard has mixed into this to indicate if a pig has been eating the toxicant. So it stays in the pig system for about 18 days, and it does come on fairly quickly within hours of eating the bait, and Richard's done work on that, and they've published it. So it's easy to tell if a pig has ingested this stuff, and that was a question that we had in Texas for folks that are hunting is, if I shoot a pig that my neighbor has been poisoning, am I going to know? And I'm going to show you photos on that. I do want to emphasize, although we watched for non-target issues and secondary toxicity issues, we were not tasked with doing that. And as you saw from Richard's slideshow, it is a very big, very expensive undertaking. So our study did not directly look at secondary toxicity. And forgive the slide of parts and pig parts. When I talk about the blue dye, it shows up very, very clearly. So the top left photo is a pig that we found very quickly after it died, as is the one immediately to the right of it, that piglet. These died so quickly before we got to them that rigor mortis had not set in yet. So that blue dye is evident in the fat in that body. But one thing I really want to emphasize is that in carcasses we had and that were scavenged quickly, it is easy to tell when they had consumed this product because the blue dye ends up in synovial fluid and joints. As you can see on the photo there, even the bones end up getting dyed blue. And any of that fat that's in the hide or even some of the cartilaginous tissue stays blue for quite a long time. So even some period after those pigs had been killed by this stuff, that blue dye stayed around. And I think that's really important for folks that are looking at this from a record keeping and or enforcement stance is you've got that long lasting effect of that blue dye showing you that yes, this animal did consume this, even if it's been mostly scavenged by that point. So one thing I want to talk about that we ran into, so obviously the product works, killed pigs. We didn't run into any issues with that as long as everybody followed instructions. But Richard pointed out the importance of using approved feeders with pull force or weighted doors, and I cannot emphasize that enough, not just with this product, but with other chemical control methods for pigs. We have seen things like powerlifting raccoons that will get underneath the door of a feeder, and if you've ever watched a powerlifter do squats, they will lift that door. A 15-pound door, a raccoon will lift it, and another raccoon will climb inside and start eating. That is something I cannot emphasize enough is the exclusivity of this relies on gravity, a door that works well, and weight. That is the only thing that prevents and deters non-target access, and it works well when it works. And everything is a mechanical device that has to be maintained, and this is no different. So Richard mentioned securing and anchoring these things. Can't agree with that enough, and I'm going to show you some of the problems we ran into, and again, talk about how we overcame them. So we had these two feeders, the hog stopper and the commercial one that Richard mentioned. And he's already talked about these, so I'm going to skip through. This is just how they're designed. Oh, and since some folks have asked, this is in the state of Texas, everywhere we worked. So we're just widely distributed throughout the state. So forgive me, I haven't given the slideshow in a little while. I mentioned that this product was effective statewide and in all seasons of the year when it was applied diligently. And I'm going to emphasize that word diligently. Of course, we always want pesticide applicators to be diligent to the label. And they were. But there are also nuances in being diligent. So when you did it, we saw significant reductions in damage in pig presence. We had spots where we noted 90% reduction or better of pigs in those areas. And one thing that we had anecdotally from a number of applicators was that they feel confident every pig in the sounder and they appeared to be pig free for quite some time. When we had folks that were not diligent, they had mixed results or poor results, but they still expended a lot of effort. And I want to emphasize that we had to modify feeders a little bit to confer success, and we ran into some things that you would expect, and they aren't hard to overcome. And we did not have any significant non-target issues. So one thing I want to talk about, pigs are rough on stuff. We all know that. We had issues with the feeders in terms of doors getting jammed open, doors getting stuck. And this mostly had to do with the fact that pigs are extremely rough on equipment and metal can warp and get bent and various things. And I want to emphasize, we conveyed these results to Richard years ago, and I know they've made some modifications based on them. There are common sense solutions for things. So the tracks of the door would get stuck and jammed when pigs had worked them enough. And we would take a pry bar and just open those doors up a little bit so they were not as tight on the tolerances from when they were made. In one case, because God love a farmer that loves a grease fitting, we had a farmer drill and tap and install Zerk fittings on the door. And so every time he came by to put feed in, he just zip a little grease on the door. I'm telling you guys, that guy was on top of it. So as long as the doors were in good shape and moving up and down well, we had no problem there. We did have some issues when feed wasn't getting consumed readily with the bait getting wet and turning mushy. And so you could put in a drain pan or drill holes. If the bait's getting used though, you don't have that problem. It doesn't stay around long enough for it to get wet. We do, again, just see things break down with time, but anybody that's used to fixing things on a farm or a ranch is used to welding up stuff that's cracked, replacing parts that are broken. But I think it's more to emphasize for applicators, you do need to be diligent in making sure that your device is in good working order and in good repair. One thing that we saw was rooting under the feeder. So one thing that happens when pigs are eating out of this thing, they're eating the bait and they're dropping a little bit. Now, the nice thing about this bait not being acutely toxic, so that it takes time for them to die from it, is they clean up their mess. We found very little spilled bait, which is very important from a non-target perspective. But the backside of that is they end up rooting underneath the front edge of that feeder a little bit. And I'll show you the problem with that in, I think, the next slide or two. And that is something that you just have to keep an eye on to make sure that your feeder is level and well grounded and anchored. So that's what happens when they root underneath it in sandy soil and we don't do a good job of maintaining it. And that is something that I want to point out. This is not an unreasonable thing. That soil is sandy loam, but it's very sandy. And the applicator in this case just did not have time to come back. At this angle, the door will still work okay. It's actually wedged open in this photo because it's stuck in the track and it can't go down all the way. But what happened shortly after that, and as you can see, that's one day to the next, that feeder ends up sideways on the ground because the pig pushes it over. And at this point, the door will slide open and stay open, and non-targets can get access to it. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is that in all of our studies, we never had a situation that non-targets actually seemed to care about the bait, other than pigs wanted to eat it. And when we used the lure, the placebo version, because we were curious what would want to eat it, raccoons were interested in it. Other than that, nothing seemed to even want to eat it. We had cattle, sheep, goats, deer inspect it. They smelled it, walked away from it, and I have a feeling it has to do with what's in the bait. It just did not appear palatable to them. So one thing that we ran into early on, so Richard talked about, you pin the door open and they get used to eating out of it and then you close it. In that time, the pin on the feeder was about 7 inches from open to closed. And they would eat out of it readily, but when we closed the door, they would not work that bar. So I kid you not, we had a trapper working with us who looked at that and said, the long side of a 2x4 is about 3.5 inches. And he stuck a scrap piece of 2x4 in there and drilled a hole about halfway in between. And that half stop that we came to call it was enough to train the pigs. They could see the bait. And then because of the shape of a pig's head, when they started to stick their head in, it worked the door open. And after even just a day or two of that, sometimes they would understand how to work the door. Then you could close it and put the toxic bait in and get to business. As I mentioned, it's important to grease the doors and maybe even bend tracks to make sure things are open and free. If you'll forgive the analogy, I always tell people that the product from the machine shop that made it was awesome, but it was an AR-15, and I needed something more like an AK-47 that was nice and rattly, but would still go bang when I needed it to. The tolerances were just very, very tight. So the door stages, the bait mixture that we came up with, and just making sure those feeders were working allowed us to get pigs trained to it and use it as per instructions and as per the label. And just to give you an idea of what these half stops look like, so that 3.5-inch open gap is really very small, but they've been trained to eat at that fully open door. They know what's in it. And so when you go to that half stop, they are willing to put the effort in. And Richard showed you earlier a photo of the commercial feeder just with all thread, washers, and nuts to create that gap. And then this modified bait mix just to get them trained to eating stuff with what they already know. I'm going to move a little quickly. So one question that we had pretty early on at the state level was, hey, what about moisture? Hey, what about hot temperatures? So Richard covered the moisture issue to an extent with pigs eating underwater, and I mentioned it already. So this is a photo of some bait when we were having trouble getting pigs to use the doors that stayed wet after a big storm, and it stayed wet for a while, and it disintegrated a small amount and got a little moldy just in that one corner where it was a little lower and it stayed underwater. So we drilled holes in the bottom just to release water if it got in there, and that worked fine. But when animals were actively using the bait, it doesn't stay around long enough for this to be an issue. And I think that's part of an applicator's diligence is just, is this getting used? Is it not? As Richard mentioned, if it's not, you need to move on or do something different. The heat is something that we get asked about a lot in Texas as well. And so I do want to show you an example of these placebo blocks that came out of a bucket and they were a little bit melty and then they stuck together. I want to emphasize that we took that bucket, we whacked it on the toe ball a couple of times, and like a bag of ice from the convenience store, it broke apart and then it was good to go. So there's no real issues. And we stored these things in the hottest steel boxes we could find just to see in the heat of the summer when it's 108 outside and that box is in direct sun, could we make this stuff, break down or melt entirely? And no, it was quite stable. We do in Texas, we had some non-target concerns that y'all don't have, but one that was expressed pretty early on was javelina. And so this is something I wanted to point out. So this is an example where a javelina managed to get access to a door because it jammed open. And that was something that was of concern for us, but you can see the javelina's in there trying to make it work. And so javelina goes in there, investigates the bait, is smelling around, and walks away. Now you can see that there is a block of bait on the ground. So it's pushed a little bit of bait out. One javelina came in one time, checked it out, walked away. Never had an issue with this ever again. It was one time, and again, due to just a mechanical problem. This is part of the advantage of us monitoring these things all the time for many years, is we did not have problems other than one odd animal who wanted to check things out and then apparently never came back again. So again, not a lot of interest from non-target animals, but I want to emphasize we did not use it around bears. That was just something that we did not step into. So what made it work? Well, applicators invested time in good conditioning and they really were diligent. I compare this a lot to using chemical herbicides for brush control. If you use it per recommendations and you are on the money about your mix, all of the things that you do, the time of year that you spray, and making sure you get good coverage, it works. If not, you spend a lot of money and you don't get very good kill. But that's on the applicator for being diligent to the process. Now, this process, again, could take up to 3 weeks prior to toxic bait. We had situations where the pigs were trained and ready to go within a week. And I think that there are things a person could do to tighten that window up. As I mentioned earlier, we never let the feeders go empty, and we check them every 2 to 4 days, but sometimes we're checking them every day if the pigs are in the midst of really consuming heavily. And I thought using game cameras was handy because there's not a guessing game about what came in, what happened, when you've got a camera on it and you can monitor. So what made it fail? We did have a few situations that it just did not work well. Well, no feral hogs, as we've all experienced. Sometimes you go to the trouble of putting out a trap and then the pigs aren't there and you go, well, I guess they ran away from the trap. That was effective. So no pigs sometimes. Inconsistent baiting. Folks really wanted to do this, but then life happens, things get busy, and they just didn't have time. And so the pigs never really got conditioned to that. So that's my next point, lack of conditioning. The last point I really can't emphasize enough is harassing feral hogs at bait sites. We had more than a couple of situations where the pigs were well conditioned, we were about to go toxic, and then we had somebody decide to shoot a pig at a bait site or harass them in some other way. My personal favorite is on one ranch. We see in the game camera photos, pigs are eating, it's going great. A truck drives down the road, and this is one of the ranch hands. It stops, the window rolls down. I can see the barrel of the rifle come out the window, and then the pigs are all gone, and then pigs never came back again. So that was one of those unfortunate situations that completely avoidable. You just have to be committed to waiting for them all to die rather than getting nervy at the fact that you've been feeding pigs for a couple of weeks and they're still around. So again, I want to emphasize what we did not evaluate because this was not part of our charge or, to be frank, our budget scoping. We did not evaluate humaneness. I'm not qualified to do that. That's its own entire field of study. We didn't look at secondary toxicity to scavengers, although I will point out we did not note any problems in our study sites. We didn't look at cost effectiveness. Our job was to see if it could work and what it would take to get it to work. And we weren't looking at environmental residency, although this stuff is fairly apt to break down in the environment from the literature I've read. But that was not something that we were tasked to look at. So some takeaways I also want to point out to you. The product has got great capacity for efficacy. We managed to kill an awful lot of pigs very quickly. It does require time, money, and work, and that's true for any feral hog management method you choose to use. And it only works with constant effort by the applicator. Refills of bait, making sure the feeder's working, and keeping things in good working order, just like everything else on a farm or a ranch. And I do want to point out, everybody says, follow the label. People have to follow the label. Y'all know that better than anyone. But also one thing that a couple of our applicators pointed out, which I think is really good to mention, especially if you've got University of Arkansas Extension doing work, is being mindful of non-targets, but not in the way you think. So this photo is one that was taken by an applicator, and he pointed out, we are in the middle of calving right now. I killed a bunch of pigs with this product, and boy, it killed a bunch of pigs, and it has sucked in a bunch of black vultures. And then I started calving, and I created a little bit of a problem for myself. I don't usually have that many vultures present when I start calving. That's something that he emphasized folks might want to be thinking of is if I'm expecting to start calving soon, maybe I need to wait, or maybe I need to plan it earlier, which is a fair thing, right? Don't create a problem for yourself. Okay, with that, I apologize for taking up so much time. I'm happy to answer questions if you've got them. Again, if things percolate up later, you're welcome to call or email me. I'm a public servant of the state of Texas, so I'm on the clock and happy to help if you need it. With that, I can go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and if y'all want to ask questions, happy to, and if not, I will mute myself and get out of your meeting.
Thank you, John. Any questions? I know we have one more presentation from Arkansas Feral Hog Eradication Program. So I don't have any. Let's move to our next presentation, Susan. Presenter.
It's Ryan Farney. He's with the Arkansas Feral Hog Eradication Task Force. Ryan, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, just going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you for your time. I appreciate y'all have given me an opportunity to talk here at your meeting today. And I first wanted to thank our two other presenters. That was some good information, and I appreciate that. So my name is Ron Farney. I work for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission as the Feral Hog Program Coordinator, and I also serve as the chair of the Arkansas Feral Hog Eradication Task Force. And this has been on the task force radar for some time now, and we actually had a meeting last week on the 6th, and this was a pretty good chunk of our meeting, and we discussed this at length and talked about the advantages and the potential disadvantages of this product. And I just wanted to relay some of the points that we mentioned in our meeting and kind of what we thought about this. And I'd like to say first and foremost that the goal of the Arkansas Feral Hog Eradication Task Force is to eliminate hogs. So I don't want anybody to take what I'm about to say and think that I'm trying to protect hogs, because I'm not. I'm just trying to make sure that the state of Arkansas does it in a way that's going to be as effective and as effective as possible, while at the same time keeping our other management game species in mind. And John made an interesting point in his talk about not using this product around bears. And I would like to ask, if John wouldn't mind, if he's still on the call, what was the main reason that you didn't want to use this product around any bears?
Yeah, glad to speak on that. Pretty simply for us, we know that bears can open the feeder devices if they so choose to. Now, I don't know anything about how much a bear would have to eat to be toxic to it, but one thing that was a point from our state folks was we don't want any issue with bears, because for us, black bears are so few in number, they are absolutely protected at the state level. And so that was just a problem we wanted to avoid. But also, we don't have many areas in the state that have black bears that also have a good number of pigs. So it was just avoid a potential problem and hone in on the things they asked for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was one of the main points that the task force discussed last week, was the established black bear populations in Arkansas and their abundance associated with feral hogs in the state as well. We have a map up on the Game and Fish website that depicts the number of bears taken each county for our harvest in 2023. And as you might already think, the majority of those bears were taken in both the Ozark and the Ouachita National Forest, and both of those areas have feral hogs in those counties as well. And so our main takeaway is that we didn't feel like, and unless there's been some more research and the delivery mechanism has been altered in some way that we're not currently aware of, we didn't feel like the delivery mechanism would be able to stand up to a black bear if it wanted to get at this feed. And so that was our main thought process. And so what we developed as far as our official recommendation for this committee to consider would be, one, establishing a time frame that this bait could be used on the landscape if you wanted to do a blanket statewide approval for use. Our other recommendation was to only approve it for counties where black bears have not been harvested since 2023, and that map is easy to find on our website. Or, if you wanted to consider a statewide approval, potentially work on developing a delivery mechanism with a university or state or federal agency that would be tested against black bears to make sure that it could withstand a black bear that wanted to get in, because right now we just feel like the delivery mechanism isn't going to hold up. And so the Ouachita National Forest doesn't have as much private land throughout the forest, but the Ozark National Forest has a lot of private land in it. And we are just concerned that we'll have applicators on those areas across the state that are, one, not paying, the attention that they need to these delivery mechanisms, these devices, and potentially poisoning black bears on the landscape. I guess I have another question for the subcommittee, and that would be, if this was approved, would it be available to anybody that had a pesticide applicator's license?
This is Susie Nichols. I'm going to chime in. As of right now, this product is not considered a federal restricted use pesticide, nor is it considered a state restricted use pesticide. If the committee or the board chose to go that route, we would have to go into rulemaking to make it a restricted use pesticide, which we do have the ability to do.
Okay. The other thing is if this was approved, would somebody be able to buy the bait without buying the delivery device, the feeder itself?
That's the manufacturer.
The manufacturer, are these sold separately or does it come together? Sorry, this is Susie.
Yeah. Yeah, we would insist that they used an approved device if they purchased a product, and that would be controlled by whoever the distributors are in Arkansas. So yeah, it'd be very much a part of the package, and that's why we discussed it with Oklahoma, and they opted to go with our recommendation and make it a restricted use product.
Okay, so
with the approved device in Oklahoma.
No, yeah, they have to use the approved device.
That's part of the label.
Right.
Okay.
And that's true in Texas as well. Richard, isn't that device specified in the EPA label as well?
Yes, it does. It talks about the weight of the door, and it's in there. So
okay. That's good.
But for the pesticide committee and anyone else listening, if the label is approved as is in Arkansas right now, anyone can purchase it. If y'all wanted to put restrictions on it that required people, the purchasers, be trained, it would have to be designated as a state restricted use pesticide. And again, that does require rulemaking. We've done this before. We have other pesticides that fall into this category.
Right now, it's legal to purchase since there's a federal.
It's not currently registered in the state of Arkansas,
okay.
But as soon as it's registered, it can be purchased.
Okay.
Without a license.
Without a license, all right.
Yeah, so our recommendation would be at the very least that this would be a restricted use pesticide, and that people would have to buy the delivery mechanism, and that it be restricted to a specific time frame, particularly when bears tend to den or in counties where we have no recorded harvest of black bears. We just don't feel like, as I stated, that the current delivery mechanism will hold up to a bear that wants to get into that feeder.
So the task force would like to see it made restricted use, limited to counties where bears.
No recording. Kills a bear?
Yeah, no recorded harvest since 2023.
And what was the other one?
Specific time frame throughout the year when bears tend to be denning, and there would be less bears on the landscape.
Okay, just to clarify, circling back to everybody, all three of these would require rulemaking in Arkansas. Again, to go through rulemaking, the pesticide committee makes a recommendation to the board. then, and Scott may chime in because this has changed.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here real quick, Susie, and just make sure everybody understands the rulemaking process is a lengthy one. And it's a multi-step process that can sometimes take several weeks to a couple of months. Any proposed rule has to work its way not only through the plant board, but through the governor and through legislative committees. So it's a little bit complex. The initiation of that, could start from the plant board, but it would have to leave the plant board and go through ALC and the governor and then back through the plant board, if I remember it correctly. So again, it's a long process that could take weeks to months, depending on how the meetings fall legislatively.
Yeah, we have no problem with, whatever amount of time it takes. So, and we agree, wholeheartedly that initially it should be done in counties without black bear, and then in the season when black bear movements are minimized.
We at the task force want to take every step possible to eradicate hogs from Arkansas. We just we recognize the risk to these animals, and we want to make sure that we provide recommendations that we feel like are in the best interest of the entire state, and not just the feral hog management. So I hope that my recommendations aren't seen as controversial or trying to detract from the effort, but that's what they are. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, actually, we had proposed that a few weeks ago at a meeting that we go in that direction. So you confirm what we believe in. So.
Well, this is Scott again. I'll jump back in if y'all don't mind. So I think based on what I'm hearing, the way I would recommend moving forward is, certainly have committee discussion today. And if the committee feels like they want to recommend to the plant board that this product be registered with specific restricted state conditions based on input from you guys, Ryan, then I think they report that out to the plant board next week. And then we'll let our in-house legal, Corey, guide us at that time as to how we initiate that rulemaking process. Like I said, it'll have to go through several steps, including the plant board, to finalize. And Corey is on here now. I see him. And if you don't mind, Corey, do you agree that that's probably the best way to approach this?
You can hear me. I don't know if my mic is working right, but yes.
We hear you. Yes.
And Scott, this is Susie. If the committee does approve this, what we can do is just take this recommendation to the board next week. And then I can start putting notes together, and I would have to circle back probably to this feral hog task force, just because I'm not a bear expert, and I'd have to start reaching out on some of these harvesting questions. That's if the board and the governor allowed us to put
so if the board agrees, if the committee agrees to go forward with restrictions and the board agrees next week, then what I think the board should do is just basically ask staff to initiate a draft, and then we'll develop a draft based on input from everybody here involved. And then that draft will be set in motion, and it'll start with the secretary, and then it'll go to the governor, and then it'll go and then I think at that time it'll go to the plant board. Then I think it goes to ALC. I can't remember the exact process, but it will start with, once we have a draft developed, with the secretary and the governor, and then back to the plant board, and then it'll go out for public hearing if we receive comments. So it's a multi-step process, and everybody will have an opportunity to lay eyes on it and provide input through that process, which is why it's that way. It's very transparent, but it is not quick at all. So,
one more thing, the individuals on here who spoke today, I know y'all gave some really good presentations, and typically what we do is George Dunklin and myself get together and do a pesticide committee report and submit it to the board. And I can certainly do a summary of what was said here today, but I would like to ask that maybe can any of y'all be on the call or in person here at the meeting next week in case there's some additional questions or maybe some of the scientific points that I didn't get across. It's going to be March 18th.
I should be able to be there in person.
Okay.
Ron, yeah, is that Ron?
Yes.
Okay. And Ron, this is George Duncan again. Just to clarify, this is the task force recommendation.
Yes, this is not any one specific agency like Game and Fish. This is the consensus from the task force.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Ryan, you can send that. I'm sure you have that written down in notes or however, and then in a written statement you can send over to us, right?
I have the minutes from our meeting from last week. I can share those, or if a statement needs to be drafted, I can have the task force.
The minutes plus a short statement, if you don't mind, maybe hit the bullet points, would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I'll work on getting that drafted up and signed by the task force members.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Matthew, Matt Miles, are you still on? And Nathan?
Yes, sir. I'm still here.
Yes.
A motion to allow us to move forward.
So
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, the motion is to move forward as at the recommendation of the Arkansas Federal Hog Education Task Force with their recommendation as they presented it today, and that was second, so made by Matt and second by Nathan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion passes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. That was lengthy, but good. And I know, Scott, it's going to take a long time, but you got to take that first step to get where we need. We've been fighting feral hogs. Hey, we declared war on when I was on the Game and Fish Commission. That was 2 decades ago. So,
yeah, it's been a long fight, hard fight. So
they're getting smarter and better. So hopefully this will be something we can take care of. Jim, thank you very much. You do not have to stay for the rest of the meeting. We just got some other business to talk about before we adjourn. So thank you very much for everybody that was involved in the discussion.
Well, everybody who spoke on feral hogs, Brandy and I will be circling back to you regarding next week.
Sorry, this is Ryan one more time. Who should I send those minutes and that letter to?
Susie.
Do you have my email, Ryan? Susie?
I don't know if I do or not. I'm sorry.
Oh, she's been in communication with you.
Ryan, you can send it. I think you and I have corresponded. You can send it to me if you want. I'll forward it or I'll loop everybody in so y'all can start corresponding from there on.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome.
Hey, Scott, stay on for just a second in other business. And we'll go to this I just got a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Any updates on the dicamba use of this season? Well, you're hearing rumors of Section 18 and 24C.
So, yes, sir. I'm hearing rumors of both. I'm specifically hearing that some people seem to be keying in on 24C, but I don't have any details. I don't have anything to back that up other than an occasional here and there, somebody telling me that they're hearing that that might be in discussion nationally, and some other states might be taking the lead on that. We haven't been involved with EPA or anybody here. In fact, our last dicamba in-crop update that I'm aware of, and Susie can correct me if I'm wrong, that we got from EPA was on November 18th. We met with them recently for our end of the year meeting on February 26th, but I don't recall any dicamba in-crop related discussion then. But when we did meet with them on November the 18th, they told us that their legal department had reviewed the possibility of a Section 18 or a 24C emergency exemption and had determined that neither one of them would get approved. They also indicated that their registration program is underfunded and understaffed, and that the typical 17-month review period for new product registration is taking longer than 17 months. They also indicated that they did not feel like stocks would be available even when or if these products are registered in 2025 or so, that they did not think there would be enough product available till 26 or possibly into 2027. So I do know that Bayer initiated the first product, and based on the time they dropped that one into registration, it would, if it went the bare minimum of 17 months, I think it would end up being September of 2025. BASF submitted a product about a month later, and Syngenta submitted one about a month later than that. So there are three, as I understand it, products in motion, but the earliest any one at best could be available and registered to be about September or October of 25.
Okay. September 25,
You
26.
mean 26?
26.
25, I believe.
And we're in 25.
Right.
But they did it in this past fall in 24, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the Bayer product, they dropped it and it went through a 30-day public comment period, which ended June the 3rd.
24?
Of 24.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
When I did the math, I don't remember exactly when they submitted it for registration, but when I did the math last summer, when this was set in motion, the Bayer product came out to September of 25, this coming September, the end of this season. And then again, the BASF was about a month behind, and then the Syngenta was about a month behind BASF. But that, was under really optimum circumstances, minimum 17-month review. And the last we heard from EPA, they said it would most likely take longer. And I don't have any update from there. There has been an election since then. And as we all know, things at the federal level are changing and in motion. And I don't know. I really don't know if anything will change, if there will be any policy changes that can make the registration process speed up a little more or even slow down a little more. I just don't know.
Well, I think nobody knows, especially what's going on in Washington right now. Scott, since the extend crops are being planted now so prevalent in the whole landscape, do you anticipate any illegal use of dicamba this year?
Well, again, based on what I'm hearing, I've heard from several farmers, some soybean farmers who I administer the soybean promotion board, and it wasn't any farmers on that board, but it was just some farmers indicated that they think there'll be some, and then some other folks I've talked to think there'll be some.
Well, knowing that, what is the plan that you and your staff have then to enforce the laws that we have? Or how are we going to get the word out that this is not legal to use?
Well, I think we have a couple of options as far as outreach. We have a marketing group. We can, put out press releases. We could maybe talk to our partners at U of A and see if they could help with some informational outreach, pushing it out. I think from an outreach information, get it out there standpoint, we have a lot of opportunities and capabilities. From an enforcement standpoint, as you all know from years past, we have so many inspectors in the field that can only be so many places at one time. They can only work so many hours a week. They do things, they're tasked with lots of duties other than just pesticide enforcement. They do H2A housing inspections, and they basically provide inspector services out to every single program we conduct here. And we have limited resources. And I'm not going to sit here and be dishonest to anybody. I mean, we were overwhelmed in 2017 and then the years following. It was a very difficult situation for us to manage, created a huge backlog in cases. And I can't sit here and tell anybody that won't happen again this summer. I mean, I don't know what to expect, and I don't know, we will respond to every complaint that's called in here, and our record, Susie's team and David Ford, who's on here, his inspectors team, their record shows that throughout all of this, we have responded. We've worked every case that was called in. But at some point, you get overwhelmed and you can only do what you can do. So I haven't sat down with staff and tried to develop any kind of specific game plan other than, we're going to do our best to respond and work the cases.
Susie, you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to chime in. Let's see if there's something you want me to follow up on. The Section 18 and 24Cs, since this board is fairly new, would you like me to just put a few bullet points together as to what is a Section 18 and a 24C? Like I said, these are common terms to myself and Brandy, but most people don't know what they are.
Section 18, I was not familiar with Section 24C, I looked up. I think that'd be a great idea for all of us.
We can just do some simple bullet points.
Scott, I'm just going to ask you as chair of this committee, if you could put together, get with your staff and prepare a plan and report back to us on how you plan to prevent this to the best of your ability and the best of the agency's ability, the legal use of ICAMA that's going to happen, that we think might happen in the state this year.
I have already put together the agenda for March 18th, and that was not on there, but I'm sure Chairman will allow us to, under other business, to give you all a report out. So we'll plan on providing a report to you all March 18th next week under other business, and we'll talk about it. I'm sure Secretary Ward will be available if he's not out of town, and we'll talk about it on March 18th.
Scott, thank you so much for that. Committee members, anybody else have any comments or questions for the director?
I get one update.
Sure, Susie.
Licensing. We get a lot of calls about licensing, so I want to give y'all a quick update. A private applicator, a farmer getting a license, those expire monthly. The renewals are sent out 60 days prior. Within that renewal notification, it is emailed or mailed, depending on what we have on file. It gives them the link to the U of A training, and it also has our application, which is pre-filled for the privates. They just have to fill it out, send it back. They get an invoice. For commercial applicators, those expire December 31st of each year. Those renewals were sent out the 1st of November. I'm telling everybody this because we've had a lot of an influx of calls in the past week. People panicking, needing their license. We can't expedite 20,000 licenses. We're doing everything we can, but there's no way to pay over the phone. There's no way to just enter your credit card and get the license online, because each of these license types require multiple things that go with it. Insurance, training. So all those standards have to be met. Maybe sometime in the future with this new database, those bells and whistles will be into place, but I've reassigned most of the pesticide section staff to kind of deal with this influx. I don't really consider us behind, other than a lot of people who just forgot to get their license in the fall, all of a sudden need to buy chemical this week. We're doing everything we can. Again, I don't really consider us behind. It's just there's not a way to do this in 5 minutes. So, thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Matt or Nathan, you got a question for me or Susie or Scott?
No, all good here.
Okay. Anybody else that's on the call here? Members of the plant board that are on the call: Sam, Caleb, Robert, Travis.
No, George, no, I don't have any questions. I think it's a very good meeting there. I want to compliment everybody that participated.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. Will we see you next week, Sam?
Yes, I'll be there Tuesday. Or what day? The 18th.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah, the 18th.
Okay.
Here in other business, I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr.
Recording
Thank
stopped.
you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.